My name is Stefan Samoji. I work on security and privacy products and technologies here at Google. I spend most of my time on stuff that protects people. Safe browsing is one example of that. The safe browsing system, which you may have heard of, hunts for badness. It looks for malware and phishing and unwanted software all around the internet. And then we tell browsers, not just Chrome, but also Firefox and Safari, about what we find so that they can warn their users. Safe browsing protects over 1 billion people. It works out to be about 40% of the total worldwide internet population every single day. I also work on stuff to improve the state of encryption on the internet overall, including both our end-to-end open source project, as well as our Safer Email Transparency Report.
All right, thank you so much, Stefan. And I want to thank those of you who have patiently waited. I know that we're getting started about 15 minutes late. I am going to make sure that everybody who was going to watch can see from the original event page that we are over here. Yes, even Google occasionally experiences technical difficulties. So cool. So thank you all so much for your patience. Again, I apologize for our technical difficulties. So I want to give a little bit of background quickly on Take Action here. So we started Google Take Action to inform and to engage internet users on public policy issues that affect the internet. Those of you who follow us on Take Action, you'll know that we've talked a lot about security and encryption lately. So we thought it would be great to invite one of Google's security experts to talk about online security generally, and especially encryption and why it matters. Stefan will also be able to talk a little bit about some of Google's own efforts in the area. And I know that we've had a ton of questions on the G+ page. And so I want to thank all of you who submitted questions. We're going to try to get to as many as we can. I am going to enable the Q&A app here. And so we'll be able to see questions in real time, but I do want to note that we've had so many questions already on the G+ page that we're not going to be able to get to everybody. But so again, thank you so much for your patience. I apologize for those of you who may have scheduled time to watch. And Stefan, thank you for your patience as well as we finally now have this started. So I want to start with a couple questions that address the basics. And so we have a question from Gerald Roybal. What is encryption? The term is used a lot, but what does it mean to civilians?
So encryption is a generic term, and it basically describes a bunch of math and then a bunch of software that actually implements that math, which is designed to make sure that only those people who are authorized, who are the appropriate people, have access to the real data. So you hear about keys in the context of encryption. There's different kinds of keys, but fundamentally, if you have the keys and you know the encryption being used, you can access the data. You use encryption what's called at rest. So if you have a hard drive in one of your computers or an SSD or a flash drive, those can be encrypted. And that means that if somebody tries to access it without actually having the right key, they can't actually read anything that's on there. It's just gibberish. The same thing happens when we transfer data over the internet. The idea is the connection between your browser, say, and Gmail should be encrypted so that anybody along the way who might have access to the bits as they fly back and forth across the internet, they should not be able to read your email as it is in transit between Gmail and your browser. So encryption is basically protection for data. And if it's done right, and if it's used correctly, it protects your data so that only you and those at the other end who also have the key can see it.
Great, thanks. And then we have another question from Scott Lawrence Lawson. So what is the relative importance and the benefits of encryption between data at rest and then encryption of data in transit?
So they solve slightly different problems using the same tool. Data at rest means anything that isn't actually being transmitted over the internet at that time. most data, for instance, on your mobile device or on a personal computer tends to be data at rest. It's stored locally. So you care about encryption of data at rest if you ever lose your phone. It means that unless somebody has whatever PIN or password or whatever mechanism you use to secure your phone, unless they have access to that as well, they can't actually get access to your data. Data in transit means as it flies around over networks, maybe on a local network, within your home, within your company, or across the internet. And of course, the longer the distance between the two things on this network that are communicating, the more opportunity there is for somebody along the way to have access to this data. And you just want to make sure with encryption of data in transit that nobody along the way can actually read what's being transmitted back and forth. All they see is just regular network traffic, stuff flies back and forth, but there's no way to look inside and see what it actually says.
And so another question that sort of follows on to that comes from Michael Robinson. If I encrypt an email, does the recipient need the key in order to decrypt it?
So the short answer to this one is yes, but it's actually a little bit more complex than that. Encrypting an email can take several forms. There is the encryption in transit between whatever it is that you're using as a person to read your email and whatever it is, typically called an email server, that is then going to send the email out on your behalf. So in this case, if you're using a web browser with Gmail, you want to have the connection between your web browser and Gmail encrypted. So that email is encrypted while it's traveling there. Then it's encrypted again when it's sent between Gmail and one of the many, many email servers out there in the world that also support what's called transport encryption. We have a transparency report called the Safer Email Transparency Report, which allows you to see whether, for example, your ISP encrypts the email that it sends and receives from Gmail. And if not, you may want to talk to your ISP about that. But most large ISPs do this because it's what's called a best practice today. It's what you should be doing. Now, if you're concerned that you don't even want your ISP to have access to your email, and there are entirely legitimate reasons, maybe there's financial information there, maybe there's medical information that's being sent there, and so you want to be extra careful, then you may actually encrypt what's called the body of the email, the actual stuff that gets sent back and forth. And there are a bunch of standards out there for how to do this. A very widely known one is called OpenPGP. There's another one called SMIME. And if you encrypt your email using one of those systems, you then have the assurance that if you're using it correctly, nobody along the way, nobody other than the intended recipient has access to it. And hopefully that explains it well enough, at least for starters.
Awesome, thank you. All right, so I am taking a look at some of the questions that are coming in on the Q&A app as well. And as you guys know, you can +1 them, so you'll vote up the most popular ones. So I'll keep an eye on that. Stefan, will you talk a little bit? There's one question that's actually been voted pretty highly, and it's similar to a question that Corey Samuel asked on the G+ page, and it also comes from Corey Samuel. So with Google's end-to-end Chrome plugin, does Google have any ability to decrypt the data encrypted with that plugin?
And the answer is no. It's designed so that Google does not have the ability to do that. With the end-to-end Chrome plugin, it uses what's called the OpenPGP standard. And in order for that to work, both sides of a communication, email communication, have to have what's called a key pair. And this is really non-intuitive. This is one of those times where I wish whoever had chosen this term hadn't used keys. Because in the real world, you usually don't need 2 different keys to lock and unlock a door. In the real world, you only have 1 key. But in this case, with what's called public key encryption, you actually do have 2 keys. You have a private key and you have a public key. And so when somebody wants to send you encrypted email, they need your public key. They use that public key to encrypt it. and then only you who has the private key can decrypt it. And that's, in short, how it works. The private key used for end-to-end always stays on the local device. Google never has access to that. Google cannot decrypt that data. That has a couple of downsides. For one thing, we can't scan that email for bad attachments, for malware, for things that might harm the user. But that's, for some people, an acceptable trade-off, and they know to be extra careful in those situations. So the short answer is, no, we don't.
And then here, so there are a couple questions that are specific to PGP and end-to-end. And I'm wondering, so here's one from Jonathan Cedar. Back in 2014, there was an announcement for end-to-end encryption, and there's a link here to the blog post. Is there any progress on that project? Several Chrome extensions do PGP-compatible encryption, but it would be great if Google delivered easy-to-use, full integration, promoting encryption with elliptical curve keys. Is there any timetable or updates on the project status? And I know for some of you who are watching, elliptical curve keys is probably one of those technical terms that's way out there. But if Stefan, if there's a simple explanation of what that might mean, that would be helpful to include as well.
So it's actually elliptic curve, not elliptical. But
all right, we don't exercise with them.
Unfortunately, my imagination fails me. There is no easy to digest way of explaining that. At the same time, the reason that elliptic curve keys are useful and interesting is because they use typically less compute power than some of the other public key mechanisms that are available out there. So elliptic curve is really popular on mobile devices, which typically don't have these really beefy chips in them to do a lot of computation. Mobile devices also tend to be really power stingy. They have to be because you want your battery life to be long. And so that's one of the reasons that, particularly on mobile devices, elliptic curve cryptography is really popular. Now, as to the specific question from Jonathan, we, as Google, across all of Google, we typically don't talk in terms of timetables for things. We've always said, even back in June 2014, that we would make end-to-end available when we felt it was done, and we felt it was good enough so that people can really rely on it. And so we are absolutely working on it. It's very much a live project. In order to do this right, there are a lot of really complicated pieces that all have to work together well. It would have been much easier to build something that is not very usable by ordinary human beings. But one of the challenges that we set ourselves with end-to-end very specifically was not just build something that is secure, that uses state-of-the-art encryption, and that technologically is really sound. But we very deliberately set out to build something that can be used by somebody who's motivated, but who isn't a security expert. And one of the downsides of setting the bar quite that high is that it takes longer than one might otherwise hope. So we're definitely working on it. Watch this space. We hope to have updates in the not too terribly distant future.
Thanks. I want to just take a second to jump to a couple questions that have to do with some lawful access issues. So Brian Merrill asked us, does Google believe that the government has a legitimate interest in accessing encrypted information when done so under judicial review, that is a warrant? And Jeff Hirai, what value is encryption when the government requires a backdoor? So Stefan, I'm actually going to go ahead and tackle this one. If you have anything to add, please feel free to jump in. So the government has a legitimate interest in accessing communications when we can provide them and pursuant to a warrant. So the key there, obviously, is pursuant to a warrant and when we can provide them. Google doesn't, as Stefan has stated, Google doesn't have a magic key to decrypt communications either. And there's no what's called a general right to evidence. And that means that evidence doesn't exist just because the government seeks something. So if end-to-end encryption is used or if the device is encrypted, we can't disclose, and we would oppose policies that require us to engineer vulnerabilities into our services, like backdoors, for the sole purpose of facilitating government access. Stefan, if there's anything you want to add there.
Well, just from a very simple technical point of view, if you engineer a backdoor into any security system, that backdoor can and eventually will be exploited by the bad guys, whoever those bad guys might be, somebody unauthorized. So fundamentally, on the technical side, backdoors are just a really bad idea. You cannot make a backdoor that is selective, that will only ever let the good guys in. And so for that reason, just at a technical level, anything related to a golden key or backdoors or magic keys, it's nonsense. And we absolutely don't believe in it. We don't support it. And none of our engineering is intended to do anything like that. We build secure systems in such a way as that we make them as secure as we possibly can.
Thank you. So there is a highly voted question on the Q&A app, and it has to do, it's from Jake Seward. Let's select it. Will Google create a VPN service similar to what currently exists on Project Fi that any user can download as an app and run on their mobile devices, smartphone, tablet, laptop?
So this actually has a lot of subtleties in it. A VPN service, for those of you who don't know what it is, VPN stands for Virtual Private Network. And the idea being that you create an encrypted pipe between you and wherever it is that you're going. VPNs are very popular in corporate environments and business environments, but over the years, the necessity for an actual VPN is very, very limited. One of the things that we do at Google is we make sure that the connection between our user's endpoint, the device, whether it's a phone, a tablet, or a laptop, and Google itself is encrypted. So when you use a Google service and it says HTTPS in your browser, hopefully Chrome, then you know that that connection is encrypted, and that solves exactly the same problem that a VPN would solve. So to a certain extent, all of the efforts that Google makes to guarantee that the connection between you, the user, and our servers and all of our compute in the back end, if that's encrypted, that's the same thing as a VPN effectively. You are connecting to us via an encrypted pipe so that nobody can actually see what's flying back and forth. Only you and only we.
Awesome. So I hope that answers that question. And then I think what we can do, I think that's a nice lead in to a question that we have from Rita. Where do you see security practices going in the next 2 to 5 years?
So I'm hoping that more and more developers of security technology and more engineers begin to appreciate the fact that security is actually about the humans. It's much less about what your key length is and using fancy acronyms, because a lot of the core technology is at this point relatively mature, it's well understood. The thing that's hard and the thing that has proven itself difficult for a really long time is how do you make sure that what the humans are doing is actually safe? How do you not just educate users, but ideally, how do you build systems that don't give the users the opportunity to shoot themselves in the foot security-wise? So we're spending a bunch of effort on technologies that are usable in a safe way with safe defaults by people who are not technical experts. So one good example of that is what we're trying to do with the end-to-end project, which I described earlier. Another good example is a technology that we're involved in as part of our membership with the FIDO Alliance, and this technology is called Security Key. And the idea is you should be able to authenticate yourself to prove to a service provider that you are authorized to access that account, but you shouldn't have all the vulnerabilities of a password or some of these older systems that basically allow the fallibility of humans to be exploited. So phishing is something that's really bad. Phishing with a PH is where bad guys of various stripes will try and extract from you both what your account name is and what your password is. And if you have an account name and a password on a relatively simplistic service somewhere, and a bad guy winds up stealing that, they can impersonate you, log in, and do stuff in your name, or they can get access to your data. And if this is a financial service, or if this is healthcare related, or even if it's just something that is sensitive to you that you want to protect, the username and a password just isn't enough today. A couple of years back, we introduced the notion of two-step verification. And there's a smartphone app called Google Authenticator that you can put on your mobile device. And that works okay, but that's also not very human-friendly because you have to unlock your phone. You have to transcribe 6-digit numbers. Humans are really, really good at mistranscribing stuff, so you'll make a mistake. And the whole thing is just really annoying. With Security Key, you really only have to touch this thing after you insert it into your computer. You might think intuitively, well, if I touch it, isn't that a lot less secure? The important thing about the way Security Key works is inside, it has a lot of encryption and cryptography technology. It's out of sight, but it helps secure that connection. It helps you prove that with one of these security keys, you really are the authorized accessor of a given account. And there's a lot of, like I said, cryptography that is used back and forth to make sure both sides are exactly who they say they are. What's important about the touch is you're proving that there's a human being in front of this machine agreeing that now is the time to do this authentication, to prove that you want to log into your account. Because what the phishers will do, if they steal your username and your password, they're going to reuse that information at a time of their choosing, when it's convenient for them. So if you can make it so that they can't reuse it at a time convenient to them, you break a lot of the economics of the phishing, and you make it very difficult for the organized criminals who do the majority of the phishing to actually make money off of it. So Security Key is one of those technologies. It's deceptively simple to use, which is exactly what we set out to do. And inside all the complex technology, we take care of it so you don't have to worry about it. And so those are some of the just sort of general practices that we see. You know, we want to continue seeing strong encryption being used, but used in a way that's easy for people to use. Not just Security Key. You should be able to do something as straightforward as type in HTTPS and feel safe and secure in the knowledge that the connection between your browser and whatever service you're using is in fact encrypted. And so Chrome spends a lot of effort making sure that the quality of encryption between it and whatever it is it's talking to is as high as can be. And it's going to start generating errors and warn you as the user saying, hey, you're trying to do something that isn't actually secure, and you will start getting errors. So if you get errors from Chrome, if Chrome tells you, there's malware ahead, or there's something wrong with the encryption, you probably don't want to just continue, because we warn you about this stuff for a reason. So overall, we're looking for ways to make people online safer and to make all of this stuff secure and usable at the same time.
Awesome. There is one question here about from Christian Taylor that also has a lot of pluses. What exactly is the government trying to do with this encryption-related bill? I'm not sure exactly which encryption-related bill you're referring to. I would suspect that it would be the Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act, which is not technically encryption related. It's about sharing cyber threat information, but that's the one that's being discussed the most deeply right now. So what I'll do is post a little bit of information about that, just in case that's the right one. And if not, Christian, if you can also reply on the page with a link to what you're talking about, because there's all kinds of stuff going on in all kinds of places that that could be relevant here. So and I will try to answer with some feedback on the page. page as well. I just want to close with one final question, and thanks everybody for hanging in there with us. Thank you, especially Stefan, for dealing with this. So one question we had from Jeff Kohlberg on the G+ page, and there was a similar one from Joshua Castro. For those of us lacking the security experience required to ask the right questions, what resources would the Google team recommend to the average consumer looking to educate themselves and others? On our side of things, we are working through Take Action to share some resources, videos and things like that on the Facebook and G+ and Twitter pages. But Stefan, also, I know that you have some ideas for places you can find information about how to better protect yourself if you're a user of Google's products and services too.
Absolutely. So we do a lot of research. And when we have interesting research findings, we tend to post them on the Google Online Security blog. And so one of the more interesting bits of research that we published back in July was the difference between what security experts believe to be the top best practices for security and what non-experts believe. And we found a lot of differences there. The title of the blog post is called New Research, Comparing How Security Experts and Non-Experts Stay Safe Online. And it's worth a read because it's exactly the kind of thing that we're really interested in doing more of, is in understanding what people think, if they have any misconceptions about stuff. And this is a really straightforward article to get a good sense of what is actually really important to do these days. So for example, the non-experts, number one thing, use antivirus software. Yet on the expert side, it's not even in the top 5. The top number one thing security experts say, and it's absolutely something I agree with, is install software updates. Regardless of what platform you use, whether it's on a mobile device, whether it's on a laptop, no matter what the operating system, if you get software updates made available to you, the most useful thing that you can do is to actually install that update, because those updates typically fix security problems that have been found and that will be exploited, particularly by organized crime, if they can get access to your machine over the internet. So anytime you hear of a security vulnerability, as they're called, especially if it's a remote one, that should be a buzzword that you listen for and that you read for. And if you get that buzzword, you should find out what security software update you need and install that. Otherwise, you should definitely exercise general critical thinking. If something doesn't quite seem right, err on the side of caution. Your gut has evolved over millennia to figure out what's dangerous. And if you're not feeling quite sure about it, don't enter your password. Maybe it is a phishing site. Find a way to verify if something doesn't seem quite right. But also take care. Make sure you're using unique passwords. Make sure you have what's called either two-factor authentication or two-step verification. Different companies and different service providers have different names for the same thing. Use strong passwords. And most importantly, the number one thing that people do is they reuse passwords across multiple services. And this means that if one service provider gets compromised and there's a breach, and whoever does the breaching takes all that data, the first thing they're going to do is they're going to reuse those passwords with those usernames on as many other services as they can. And if you reuse your password, and if you have the same account name on multiple services, they're going to get into your accounts in 5 different places, or 10, or however many times you reuse it. The number one thing that we recommend, don't reuse passwords. And we have tools like Password Alert, which is a Chrome extension that warns you, for example, if you're reusing the password for your Google account in other places. And I'll tell you, hey, now would be a good time to change that password because you just reused it someplace else. So overall, our recommendations are keep being curious, look for trusted sources of information, and don't necessarily focus on the products or something that somebody's trying to sell you. Focus on thinking about what it actually means to be secure, when you should look out for the HTTPS, things like that. And once you have that level of comfort, then you can start getting fancy with the more technical details. But fundamentally, look for software and services and tools that have the security built in from the start. And if you use that as a foundation, you will be able to learn over time and become a lot more skilled and be able to protect both yourself and those in your immediate environment better and better.
Awesome. So Stefan, that's definitely all the time we have. And thank you again for hanging in, and everybody else, thank you again. We're going to be posting the YouTube video, so hopefully people who had trouble getting to this Hangout will be able to watch at their leisure later on. Thank you for sticking with us. I do want to just do a quick shout out to those of you who signed the White House encryption petition when we sent some emails around and let you know about that. The petition passed 100,000 signatures last night, and it's still climbing. So we look forward to the Obama administration's response, and congratulations on reaching the goal. So thank you all so much, and look forward to speaking to you again, and hopefully the technical difficulties will not be there next time. So thanks, Stefan.
Thank you.